Most men get this completely wrong, and they don't even realize it's costing them attraction in real time. It's not your looks, it's not your money, and it's definitely not how confident you try to sound. It's something far more subtle, something women feel instantly but almost never explain. And here's the part that should bother you a little. Older men, without trying, trigger this feeling naturally. Not because they're better looking, not because they try harder, but because of how they communicate in small, almost invisible moments. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Because what I'm about to show you isn't about lines, tricks, or tactics. It's about 3 simple words that quietly change how a woman experiences you. And here's where it gets interesting. Most men have heard these words before. They just don't understand why they work. Let's break the first one down. A woman tells you something personal. Maybe she says she's thinking about changing careers. Most guys react instantly. Oh, that's cool. Or they jump into advice mode, trying to sound smart. But here's the mistake. They respond too fast. And this is the part most men ignore. Speed kills depth. Older men do something different. They pause, they lean back slightly, and they say one word. Interesting. Now, on the surface, it sounds simple, almost boring. But don't misunderstand this. That one word carries weight. First, it shows control. You're not reacting emotionally, you're processing. And women are extremely sensitive to emotional reactions. When a man reacts too quickly, it often feels like he's trying to prove something. But when you slow down, you create tension. And tension, when controlled, builds attraction. Second, it creates curiosity. When you say interesting, calmly, without rushing to explain, she starts wondering what you're thinking. And what happens next changes everything. She leans in emotionally, because now she wants to know more. You didn't chase her attention, you made her come toward yours. And third, it shows respect. You're not judging, you're not correcting, you're not dismissing, you're observing. And here's where many guys get it wrong. They think attraction is about impressing. But in many cases, it's actually about creating space for her to reveal herself. Older men understand this naturally. They don't rush to prove they're intelligent. They don't dominate every conversation. They're comfortable with silence. And silence, when used correctly, is powerful. But here's the deeper layer. Most men talk too much because they're uncomfortable with themselves. They feel like if they stop talking, they'll lose her interest. But the opposite tends to happen. When you speak less, but with intention, your words carry more weight. So next time she shares something, don't rush. Pause. Say, interesting. Hold eye contact just a second longer than usual. Then ask a question that shows you are actually listening. Watch how her energy shifts, because it will. Now, let's go deeper. The second phrase is even more powerful, and most men struggle with it internally. Take your time. Sounds simple, right? But here's where it gets interesting. This phrase exposes your mindset instantly. When a woman is unsure, opening up slowly, or taking space, most guys feel pressure. They start overthinking. They start pushing. They start trying to move things forward. And this is where many guys make a mistake. They confuse urgency with attraction. Older men don't do this. When she hesitates, when she needs time, when she's figuring things out, he says, "Take your time." And he actually means it. Now here's why that matters. It signals abundance, not fake confidence, not forced calmness, real emotional stability. Because in many cases, younger men operate from scarcity. They're afraid she'll lose interest, afraid someone else will take their place, afraid they're not enough. So they rush. But when you say, "Take your time," without tension behind it. You're communicating something deeper. I'm not desperate. I'm not chasing. I'm steady. And that steadiness is incredibly attractive. Because female attraction often responds to emotional safety. If she feels rushed, she pulls back. If she feels space, she relaxes. And this is where it connects to your life outside dating. Because you can't fake patience if you don't have it internally. If you're constantly feeling behind, constantly stressed, constantly needing results, that pressure leaks into how you interact with her. She feels it, even if you don't say a word. Older men often carry a different energy, not because life was easier for them, but because they've accepted where they are. They're not trying to compete with every man in the room. They move at their own pace. And that pace creates presence. So if you want to use this phrase naturally, you need to build that mindset. Start with yourself. Slow down your own life. Stop rushing your progress. Because calm men are rare, and rare is attractive. Now, the third phrase might seem the most obvious, but it's also the one most men misuse. I understand. And here's the part most guys get wrong. They either fake it, or they say it without actually understanding anything. A woman is venting, she's emotional, she's expressing frustration. And instead of listening, many men try to fix the problem. They interrupt, they correct, they minimize. That's not a big deal. But what happens next pushes her away, emotionally. Older men take a different approach. They listen fully. And then they say, I understand why that would bother you. See the difference? You're not necessarily agreeing, you're acknowledging her experience. And this is where it gets powerful. You're validating emotion without losing your frame. That balance is rare, and emotional intelligence like that tends to feel mature, grounded, attractive. But don't misunderstand this. You cannot fake this long term. Because if you're internally reactive, insecure, or easily triggered, it will show. Your tone will expose you. Your body language will contradict your words. So if you want this phrase to work, you need self-awareness. You need to understand your own reactions. Why do you get defensive? Why do you need to be right? Why do certain things trigger you? Because once you understand yourself, I understand stops being a line and starts becoming a presence. And presence is what separates men who attract naturally from men who chase constantly. Now, here's something most people don't notice. These three phrases, interesting, take your time, I understand, none of them are flashy. None of them are impressive on the surface. But together, they signal something deeper. Control, patience, emotional intelligence. And this is the part most men overlook. Attraction isn't built on loud moments. It's built in quiet ones. And what happens next ties everything together in a way most men never consider. Good. Because this is where most men start to see the shift. Not just in how women respond, but in how they see themselves. Because what we've talked about so far, those three phrases, it's not really about the words. And here's where it gets interesting. It's about the man behind them. Because two men can say the exact same thing and get completely different reactions. One says interesting, and it feels forced. The other says it, and it pulls her in. So what's the difference? And this is the part most men never question. It's not communication. It's identity. Let's go deeper. When a man lacks internal stability, everything he says carries tension. Even if his words sound right, something feels off. A slight neediness, a subtle pressure, an underlying need for approval. And women tend to pick up on this instantly. Not logically, but emotionally. But when a man is grounded, when he's comfortable in himself, even simple words feel different. They feel calm, measured, intentional. And this is where many guys make a mistake. They try to copy behavior without building the foundation. They memorize phrases, they rehearse responses, they try to act confident. But here's the truth. You can't perform presence. You either have it or you're building it. And what happens next is important, because once you understand this, you stop chasing the perfect thing to say and start focusing on who you're becoming. Let's connect this back to real situations. Imagine she tells you something emotional. Maybe she's stressed about work. Maybe she's frustrated with someone close to her. Now pay attention. A reactive man hears her words and immediately filters them through himself. What should I say? How do I fix this? How do I look good right now? So he interrupts, he advises, he tries to solve. But here's where it gets interesting. She didn't ask for a solution. She wanted to feel understood. And when that doesn't happen, she pulls back slightly. Not always visibly, but emotionally. Now compare that to a grounded man. He listens without rushing, and this is the part most men struggle with. He's not waiting for his turn to speak. He's actually present. So when he says, "I understand," it lands differently, because it's backed by attention. And attention is one of the rarest things you can give today. Now let's take this even further, because there's another layer here most men overlook. Timing. Knowing what to say is one thing. Knowing when to say it, that's where the real skill is. And this is where older men tend to stand out without trying. They don't rush moments. They let conversations breathe. They allow silence to exist without panicking. And this is where many guys feel uncomfortable. Silence feels like failure to them, so they fill it. They talk more. They explain more. They try harder. But don't misunderstand this. Silence, when you're calm, creates tension. And tension, when it's not forced, builds attraction. So when you say, "interesting," and then pause, you're not losing control of the conversation, you're deepening it. When you say, "take your time," and don't follow it with pressure, you're not risking losing her. You're showing you're not afraid to lose her. And that distinction changes everything. Now here's something deeper. Most men are afraid of losing opportunities. Older men are less afraid because they've already lost and survived. They've experienced rejection. They've faced failure. They've rebuilt themselves. So their behavior isn't driven by fear anymore. It's driven by choice. And this is where many guys get stuck. They're still operating from fear, but trying to act confident. And that mismatch creates inconsistency. One moment they're calm, the next they're over-investing. One moment they're grounded, the next they're chasing validation. But here's where it gets interesting. Consistency is what builds attraction over time, not perfection, consistency. And consistency comes from internal alignment. So instead of asking, "What should I say next?" start asking, "Am I reacting or responding?" Because that one shift changes everything. Now let's bring all three phrases together in a real flow. She tells you something new about her life. Instead of reacting instantly, you pause. Interesting. You let the moment sit. You observe her reaction. Then you ask something that shows curiosity. She opens up more. Maybe she hesitates at some point. Instead of pushing, "Take your time." And you mean it. Now she feels no pressure. She relaxes. Then she shares something deeper, something emotional. You listen fully. No interruptions, no fixing. I understand why that would affect you. And just like that, the dynamic shifts. But here's the part most men miss. This only works when it's natural. If you force it, it breaks. If you rush it, it loses impact. If you fake it, she feels it. So the real work isn't memorizing these phrases. It's becoming the type of man who naturally speaks this way. And that takes time. That takes self-awareness. That takes patience with yourself. Because the same way you're learning to give her space, you need to give yourself space too. Now here's something worth thinking about. Why do so many men feel the need to rush? Why do they feel like they need to impress quickly? Why does silence make them uncomfortable? And this is where it gets dating. It's often tied to how they see themselves. If you feel like you're not enough, you'll try to prove you are. If you feel like time is running out, you'll try to speed everything up. If you feel like you might lose her, you'll hold tighter. But all of those reactions create the opposite effect. They push away instead of pulling in. So the goal isn't just to change your words, it's to change your relationship with pressure. Because when you remove pressure, your presence becomes calm, your tone becomes steady, your communication becomes intentional. And that is what women tend to respond to. Now here's where everything connects. Older men aren't attractive because of age itself. They're attractive because of what age often builds: emotional control, patience, self-awareness. But you don't need years to start developing that. You just need awareness. And this is the part most men overlook. The moment you become aware of your reactions, you can start changing them. Slowly, intentionally, without forcing anything. And what happens next is subtle but powerful. You stop trying to impress and start becoming someone worth listening to. Good, because this final part is where everything either clicks or it doesn't. And here's the truth most men avoid. You don't attract her with words. You attract her with what those words reveal about you. Because at this point, you already know the 3 phrases. Interesting. Take your time. I understand. But here's where it gets interesting. If you use them as techniques, they'll feel hollow. If you grow into them, they'll feel natural. And that difference is everything. Most men are chasing reactions, trying to get quick results, trying to make attraction happen. But attraction doesn't respond well to force. And this is where many guys make a mistake. They think more effort equals more attraction. In reality, more pressure usually creates resistance. So what happens instead? The man who slows down, who listens, who doesn't rush to prove himself, he stands out without trying. Because he's not competing for attention. He's controlling his energy. And this is the part most men never fully understand. Women aren't just listening to your words. They're reading your timing, your tone, your emotional state. So when you say, interesting, but your body is tense, it doesn't land. When you say, take your time, but you're secretly impatient, she feels it. When you say, I understand, but you weren't really listening, it disconnects. But when your words and your state match, something shifts. You feel calm. She feels safe. The interaction flows. And what happens next feels effortless. That's the real goal. Not tricks, not lines, not performance. Alignment. So here's the challenge. Don't try to use all of this at once. Pick one thing. Maybe you start with silence, pausing before you respond. Maybe you focus on actually listening without interrupting. Or maybe you practice saying less, but meaning more. Because the less you chase, the more your presence does the work for you. And that's when attraction stops feeling complicated and starts feeling natural.